Rachel, I know you don't want to hear this, but I'm pregnant with Ben's child. Please, just leave him alone. He needs to be with me and the baby. I took a sip of my coffee, calmly looking at her over the rim of my glasses. I just have one question, I said, my voice so cold that both she and I could feel the icy void stretching between us. Is your self-worth really so low that you can only define it by destroying someone else's family and using your pregnancy as a weapon? She froze, her lips trembling as if trying to respond, but no words came out. I started to notice something was off with Ben when he began changing small habits that I had grown so accustomed to. They were practically etched into my memory. We lived together in a small apartment in Brooklyn, where every nook and cranny bore the marks of familiarity. But now, the atmosphere in that apartment felt suffocating. Ben was a predictable person. He had a tight schedule, as precise as clockwork, waking up at exactly 7 a.m., drinking black coffee without sugar, and reading the newspaper for 15 minutes before heading to work. But recently, he had been waking up earlier, spending more time on his phone than with the newspaper, and sometimes came home smelling of an unfamiliar perfume. I'm not the type to be suspicious, but women always have that sixth sense. I noticed that Ben's gaze toward me no longer held the same warmth it once did. It felt like an empty shell, trying to cover something up. One day, while borrowing his car to run some errands, I found a small earring stuck in the seat crevice. Not mine. I didn't wear flashy jewelry, and Ben knew that better than anyone. That night, I held up the earring and asked him, I found this in the car. Whose is it? Ben smiled, but I could tell it was forced, unnatural. It belongs to a colleague of mine. She hitched a ride with me the other day. She probably dropped it without realizing. Oh. I tilted my head, pretending to be nonchalant. She has good taste. Doesn't look like something your colleagues usually wear. My comment made him pause for a second. But Ben was a skilled actor. He quickly regained his composure. Rachel, don't overthink things. I work hard for us, for our future. I smiled, as if his answer was convincing enough. But deep down, I felt a sharp thorn pierce my heart. It wasn't painful, just an incessant, nagging itch. When Ben went to work, I spent the entire afternoon sitting by the window, watching the bustling crowd below. I wondered if I was being overly sensitive or if there really was a veil of lies covering our lives. I'm not the kind of person who lets emotions take over. I remembered every tiny detail, his evasive gaze, the increasing number of times he came home late, and now, that earring. They weren't clear-cut pieces of evidence, but rather scattered puzzle pieces of a picture I couldn't yet see clearly. Women possess a special kind of intelligence in love, the ability to notice even the smallest changes. But what I've learned over the years is not to act rashly. I needed more than just an earring. I needed the truth. Ben always thought he was good at hiding things. I'll admit, he did a decent job, at least to someone who wasn't as observant as I am. But the thing is, I'm not the kind of woman who can be easily deceived. It all started with the little things. The first time I noticed, the cologne on Ben's shirt wasn't the familiar woody musk scent I had bought him for his birthday last year. Instead, it was a sweet, unfamiliar fragrance, something that had never existed in our apartment. Do you smell something? Ben asked, pretending to be surprised when he caught me quietly sniffing the collar of his shirt. I smiled, calmly replying, just a strange scent. Maybe someone at the office sprayed this? He nodded quickly, almost too fast to seem natural. Yeah, probably Sarah, the colleague who sits near me. I didn't respond, just smiled. But in my mind, I added this detail to the growing list of anomalies. Every time Ben came home late, I didn't question him, but I always noted the time. His work schedule had suddenly changed, meetings dragged on longer, and there were sudden business trips. One evening, I happened to see a credit card receipt on his desk. He quickly tried to hide it when I walked in, but he wasn't fast enough. What's that? I asked. Nothing, just a lunch receipt, he said. I pretended not to care, but later, when he was sound asleep, I found the receipt in his desk drawer. A dinner at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan, on the exact day he claimed he had to work late at the office. 2 menus, not one. I pieced this together with the unfamiliar perfume, his evasive gaze, and the earring I found in the car. A picture was starting to form, but there were still gaps. All I needed was patience. Ben always thought he was clever, but he never realized that the smallest habits would betray him first. Ben had a long-standing habit. He always placed his phone face down on the table whenever he was at home. It was a small gesture, but enough to make me feel the weight of concealment. It wasn't something he used to do, and now, every time I saw it, I couldn't help but feel a heaviness in my chest. That morning, Ben rushed out of the house. For the first time in months, he forgot to take his phone with him. I looked at the phone lying there on the table, like evidence waiting to be uncovered. My hand hesitated for a few seconds before I picked it up. I didn't try to unlock it. Ben was pretty careful with his passcode. But I didn't need to. Just the lock screen was enough to confirm my suspicions. A message appeared from an unknown number. Missing me? Shall we meet today? My heart tightened. It didn't feel like a strong punch, but rather like thousands of tiny needles slowly piercing through my skin. Each word in that message was a stab, reminding me that the worst fears I had been dreading had now become reality. You might ask, how can you stay so calm? To be honest, I didn't fully understand myself either. I had mentally prepared for a long time that Ben might be betraying me. I had pieced together countless signs, the late nights, the unfamiliar perfume, the lies. But even though I had braced myself, seeing those words in front of me, how could I possibly stay calm? It felt like being thrown into a bottomless abyss. I felt like a failure. A failure for trusting him, a failure for not seeing through his deceit sooner. Above all, I felt disgusted, not just with Ben, but with myself, for letting love turn me into such a naive person. I took a screenshot of the screen, saved it to my phone, and then carefully placed Ben's phone back where it was. I did everything slowly, as if afraid that one careless move might ruin my plan. But inside, my anger was raging. Ben had betrayed me. He had taken advantage of my trust, my devotion. And that woman? Who did she think she was to intrude on my life? I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Tears and anger wouldn't help me reclaim what I deserved. I wasn't weak enough to let pain cloud my judgment. I would wait. I would plan. And I would make him pay. The next day, I continued cleaning the apartment as usual. In the dresser drawer, I found a small box, carefully hidden under some old shirts. Inside was a red dress, a type of evening gown I would never wear. 2 sizes smaller than me. I stared at the dress, my mind swirling with thoughts. The red dress, the dinner receipt, the unfamiliar perfume, the text from the unknown number. Ben was always careful, always had excuses to justify himself. But the more he tried to cover up, the more he left behind small details that I couldn't ignore. I folded the dress back into the box, closed the dresser, and sat down on the sofa. In my mind, I began planning the next step. Ben thought he could fool me. He was wrong. I wouldn't confront him, I wouldn't make a scene. I would wait until I had enough to lift the veil of lies he had built around us. That Sunday, I was enjoying a quiet morning in our Brooklyn apartment. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, falling on my desk where a steaming cup of coffee sat. I loved mornings like this, a moment of calm amidst life's chaos. My phone buzzed with an email notification. It wasn't a love letter or a bill, just the usual things that typically landed in my inbox. But this one came from an unfamiliar address. The subject line was brief yet provocative, the truth you need to know. I opened it. Inside was a single photo, nothing more, nothing less. Ben was sitting in a familiar cafe in Manhattan. His radiant smile mocked me because I knew that smile wasn't meant for me. The woman beside him, blonde, meticulously made up, lightly touched his hand, an intimate gesture that sent chills down my spine. Below the photo was a single line of text. He chose me. If it had been someone else, they might have immediately felt as though the ground beneath them had collapsed. They might have cried, screamed, or called Ben right away to confront him. But not me. You might wonder, how can you stay so calm? I wasn't calm. Inside, I felt as if a sharp blade had just sliced through me. Painful, yes, but not unexpected. I'd suspected for a long time, and now, this photo only confirmed what I already knew. But that didn't mean I would let my emotions take over. Crying or getting angry wouldn't help me reclaim what I deserved. More importantly, why should I let the woman in the picture, the one who sent this taunting email, think she could control me? I saved the photo into a private folder on my phone, labeling it evidence. Slowly, I took another sip of coffee, its familiar bitterness reminding me that everything was still under my control. He chose me, she said. That line made me laugh out loud. Chose you? I thought to myself. You think you've won, don't you? Let me tell you something, a man who betrays once will never stop. You're just the next mistake in his string of failures. But I didn't respond, not yet. I didn't confront anyone immediately. I knew rushing would only lead to mistakes. To win this battle, I needed time, patience, and a plan. She might think she was the victor, but in the end, I would be the one pulling the strings. I set my phone down, stood up, and pulled back the curtains, gazing at the bustling traffic below. My eyes held no trace of hesitation. This email didn't break me. It only fueled my determination to move forward. I wouldn't drown in pain or failure. I would wait for all the evidence to come together, for the perfect moment. And when that time came, both Ben and this woman would understand what it means to reap what they've sown. I thought silently. Thank you for sending this photo. It'll be part of my victory. I didn't reply to the email, but it wasn't hard to figure out who the woman in the photo was. Her name was Emma, Ben's new assistant. Young, beautiful, and, as a bitter twist of fate would have it, exactly 10 years younger than me. 2 days later, I received a call. Hello, Rachel? This is Emma. Her voice was sweet but laced with insincerity. We need to talk. Emma chose a small cafe in Manhattan, the same place where the photo had been taken. When I walked in, she was already seated, a steaming cup of coffee in front of her, as if she were relaxing during a casual date rather than meeting the wife of the man she was trying to steal. Emma looked stunning, but not in a way that inspired comfort. Her piercing blue eyes were calculating, her smile curved just enough to be seductive, but cold as a knife aimed directly at her opponent. Rachel, I'm glad you came, she began, her tone light but dripping with condescension. I pulled out a chair and sat down, my gaze unwavering. Cut to the chase, I said, keeping my voice as icy as possible. Emma tilted her head, her smile growing more confident. She looked at me as though I were a student being summoned to the principal's office for some wrongdoing. I won't beat around the bush. I love Ben, and he loves me. Her words struck me like a needle piercing my heart, but she didn't stop there. We don't want to hurt you, but the truth is, he deserves happiness. Do you understand what I'm saying? Emma paused briefly, studying my reaction. When I remained silent, she continued, her tone lecturing, as if explaining a truth I wasn't smart enough to grasp. Ben has told me a lot about you, Rachel. He says you're too serious, too rigid. Life with you lacks romance, freedom. Do you know how pressured he feels? She took a sip of her coffee, then leaned closer, emphasizing her point. You see, with me, Ben is a different man. He smiles more, laughs more. I've helped him rediscover who he really is. I stayed silent, but my hands clenched tightly under the table, growing colder by the second. Emma seemed to notice, but instead of backing off, she grew even smugger. I don't mean to offend you, but perhaps it's time you let Ben go. He deserves true love, a real family. I don't know what you're thinking, but I won't give him up. Her final statement was an outright declaration of war. If I were a weaker woman, I might have felt intimidated by her audacity. But I wasn't weak. I wasn't going to let her challenge throw me off course. Emma seemed momentarily surprised by my composure, but she quickly regained her confidence. It's just the truth, Rachel. I just want you to understand that you've lost this game. I smiled, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. This game? You think you've won? Emma, you have no idea who you're dealing with. She took another sip of her coffee, glancing at me to gauge my reaction. When I didn't respond, she pressed on. I'm pregnant, Rachel. Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. But I didn't show any emotion. Is that so? I asked, my voice steady. Emma nodded, her eyes gleaming with defiance. Yes. And I think this means you should step aside and let Ben be with me. The baby deserves a complete family, don't you think? Are you done? I asked, my voice as cold as ice. I laughed, a dry, hollow laugh that turned heads in the cafe. Emma looked shocked, perhaps she hadn't expected such a reaction. You think being pregnant will make me give up Ben? I asked, staring straight into her eyes. You're wrong. If you think ruining someone else's family and using your pregnancy as leverage is how you win, then let me tell you, you're incredibly naive. Emma faltered, but her eyes remained defiant. Do you really think Ben will leave everything for you? Let me tell you something, a man willing to betray the person who stood by him will never be faithful to anyone. What are you to him? A temporary distraction. Emma didn't respond. For the first time, she was at a loss for words. I stood up, leaving her sitting there with her half-finished coffee. I knew this battle wasn't over. But I also knew I wasn't the underdog in this game. Emma had declared war, and she would pay the price. Her confident smile faltered slightly, but I didn't give her a chance to respond. Standing tall, I looked her in the eye one last time. You can keep Ben, but I'll make sure you regret ever stepping into my life. Enjoy it while it lasts, Emma. Because the real game has only just begun. I left, leaving Emma behind with her lukewarm coffee and a stunned expression. I didn't need to shout or argue. What I said, and what I planned to do, was enough to let her know she had picked the wrong person to mess with. I'm not the kind of person who crumbles easily in the face of betrayal. Ben, Emma, and their little power game only fueled my determination to protect myself, not just my dignity, but everything I had built over the years. That evening after meeting Emma, I sat in my home office, going through all the paperwork and documents related to the assets Ben and I shared. Properties, bank accounts, his company, I left no detail unchecked. In the documents, I discovered something interesting. The Long Island apartment that we jointly owned had been quietly transferred into Ben's sole name 2 months earlier. I hadn't signed any papers, but he had forged my signature. I stayed calm and didn't confront him right away. Instead, I contacted Laura, my closest friend and one of the best lawyers I trusted completely. Rachel, do you realize this is a serious criminal act? Laura said after reviewing the documents. I know, I replied, my voice steady. But I'm saving this for the right moment. Laura chuckled softly on the phone. You've always been the smartest person in the room. Tell me, what are you thinking? I'm going to let Ben walk himself into his own trap. I needed more clarity about Ben and Emma's relationship. I hired a private investigator to track their every move. Within a week, I had enough evidence, restaurant bills, hotel receipts, and even photos of them shopping for baby items, a clear sign that Emma's pregnancy wasn't just talk. I decided to set a test. One evening, when Ben came home, I smiled gently and said, "Honey, I met with Laura today. She suggested we invest in more real estate. I think we should sell the Long Island apartment to raise capital. Ben froze, but quickly tried to regain his composure. He forced a smile. Oh, there's really no need. The property value is rising, selling now wouldn't be wise. But I think it's a good opportunity, I replied, keeping my tone light. Maybe we should discuss it with Laura and handle the paperwork as soon as possible. Ben didn't respond, just nodded absent-mindedly. That night, he stayed holed up in his office, making calls non-stop. I knew he was trying to figure out a way to deal with the situation, but everything was already under my control. A few days later, I received a call from Emma. Her voice was full of bravado. Rachel, Ben told me about your plan to sell the apartment. It was your idea, right? I just want to say, you don't need to try so hard to hold on anymore. Ben belongs to me completely. I laughed. Emma, thank you for calling. But maybe you should double-check the legal documents before making statements like that. My response left her speechless for a moment. But I knew this was only the beginning. Laura and I prepared a flawless plan. Legal action, I filed a lawsuit against Ben for forgery and illegal asset transfers. This ensured I could reclaim my rights while putting Ben in a difficult legal position. Assets, Laura helped me freeze all joint accounts and properties under both our names, ensuring Ben couldn't access funds to support Emma. Public exposure, I sent evidence of Ben's infidelity to the management of his law firm, jeopardizing his career. All of this happened in one day. Ben had no time to react. The night before everything exploded, I sat in my apartment, gazing at the glittering city lights. I didn't cry or feel pain, just emptiness. Rachel, are you okay? Laura called, her voice tinged with concern. I'm fine, I replied. It's not because I'm stronger than anyone else, it's because I know I deserve better than this. The next day, Ben returned home, pale-faced, to find Laura sitting in the living room with me. On the table were legal documents, evidence of his affair, and the lawsuit papers. Rachel, what is all this? He stammered. This is the consequence of what you've done, I responded, my gaze icy. As for Emma? Good luck to both of you. Just remember, you'll pay the price. Ben had nothing to say. And me? I walked out of the apartment, head held high, knowing I had won this battle. On the day I entered the courtroom, with Laura by my side, Ben sat there, his face rigid, eyes pleading. Emma was present too, but her usual confidence had vanished, replaced by an anxious look. Perhaps she never imagined things would escalate this far. The trial didn't last long, every piece of evidence was on my side. From Ben's forged documents to the secret expenses he'd incurred for Emma, everything was laid out clearly. Laura worked efficiently, and I simply sat there, maintaining a calm smile, watching everything unfold exactly as planned. When the court ruled that most of the assets, including the Long Island apartment and a portion of Ben's company profits, belonged to me, I didn't glance at Ben or Emma. There was no need. They meant nothing to me anymore. Leaving the courthouse, I walked slowly down the steps. Outside, reporters had gathered. Laura, with her sharp smile, quickly escorted me through the crowd without letting anyone capture a valuable photo. But before stepping into the car, I turned back. Emma stood there, a few steps behind Ben. She looked like she wanted to rush toward me, but was stopped by the coldness in my gaze. Rachel, you'll never have him. Emma shouted, her voice trembling with anger. I stepped closer, just close enough for her to hear me. You can keep him. He's belonged to you for a long time. But his assets? Thank you for helping me realize what kind of man he truly is. Good luck to both of you. Before Emma could say anything else, I turned around, got into the car, leaving her standing frozen in humiliation. On the final day I left the old apartment, I took one last look around. This place had once been a home, but now it was just an empty shell. I didn't feel sadness or regret. What I lost wasn't worth as much as what I had reclaimed, my freedom and self-respect. Ben called me a few times afterward, trying to explain, hoping for a conversation. I didn't answer. The last message I received from him contained only 3 words: "I'm sorry." I smiled. Apologies couldn't change anything. A few months later, I stood on the rooftop of my new Manhattan apartment, looking down at the dazzling city lights. I had invested part of my assets into my own business and started a new life doing what I loved, writing. I didn't need a man to complete me, and certainly not someone like Ben. Life was mine to live, and I intended to live it exactly how I chose. As for Ben and Emma, I heard they had moved to a small apartment in the suburbs. A friend told me they were struggling with living expenses. Perhaps Ben realized he no longer had the power he once did before losing me. The last memory I reserved for them was a silent message in my heart. Thank you for helping me grow. The score, 1-0. I raised my glass of wine, looking ahead. A new chapter of life had just begun. Now, I no longer wake up every morning to prepare breakfast for a man who doesn't appreciate me. No more waiting for him to return smelling of unfamiliar perfume or carrying the weight of a broken relationship on my own. Each day starts with things I truly love. A morning yoga class, a fragrant cup of coffee at my favorite corner cafe, and then a few hours of creative work in my sunlit office. I have time to travel, to enjoy the little things I used to put aside while caring for Ben. No one, nothing, can stop me from living the life I want. One cold winter afternoon, I happened to pass by a small supermarket in Brooklyn. I saw them, Ben and Emma. They looked worn out, their coats frayed, standing in front of the checkout counter, scrutinizing every coin in their wallet. Emma no longer carried her haughty demeanor, and Ben kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with those around him. I paused for a brief moment, not out of pity, but because I realized life always finds a way to repay people for their actions. They didn't see me, and I had no intention of approaching them. I smiled and walked on. No regrets, no guilt. What they were enduring was of their own making. Life is never unfair, what goes around comes around. I learned a costly lesson, and now I want to share it with every woman out there. Be strong. Know your worth and don't let anyone diminish it. Your life isn't meant to cling to an unworthy relationship or an unfaithful man. If you're betrayed, stand up, reclaim what's yours, and move forward. Happiness doesn't lie in someone else's hands. It lies in yours. Don't live to please others, live to love yourself. I don't need a man to define me, and I certainly don't need anyone's approval to live authentically. Ben and Emma are the past. As for me, I am the present and the future. Sitting in my favorite cafe, I looked out the window. Snow began to fall, blanketing the city in white. I sipped my cappuccino and exhaled a long, contented breath. I had won, not just because of money or legal victories. I had won because I didn't lose myself. And that, to me, was everything.